Hello everyone, and welcome to this Sunday afternoon. I'm your host, Wilda Black. Today, I am have four panelists who are going to discuss racism and social injustice in our schools. So, I'll first want to invite Mr. Michael Chihaba. He's the founder of Build a Better Body. He works as a nurse in a psychiatric hospital. He serves as an elder at Grace Fellowship SDA Church, and he recently got married to Stephanie Chiaba and graduated from University of Texas A&M with a BSN degree. Welcome, Mr. Michael Chiaba, to the show.
Thank you, First Lady. I'm glad to
Hi,
be here.
Michael.
Hi, First Lady.
Thank you for joining us to the show today. Next, I have Colin Mokua. He is a rising senior at Columbia University, where he is studying neuroscience and public health. He was born and raised in Kenya and he's active in the Kenya diaspora community. So welcome, Collins Mokua, to the show.
Hello, Auntie Wilda. Good to be here.
Hi. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Always a
Next, I
pleasure.
have Shahid Wanyanga Tate. He is a graduate of the University of Memphis, where he studied organizational leadership and communication, while also playing very essential roles as a student president for the setting the standard elite. He's also the president. He was also the president of African Student Association, and also he was the education chair of Empowered Men of Color, to say the least. Today, he's full-time entrepreneur running his own photography company, and he's also a real estate investor. He continues to give back to the community as a mentor for STS Enterprise, a very prominent non-profit organization in the city of Memphis. He prides himself in the example he strives to set for his three young siblings, his efforts to encourage and inspire those around him, and his desire to give back to the community. So welcome, Mr. Shahid Tate, to the show. Hi, Shahid. Welcome to the show. Next, I have Ikena David Nebo. He is also from Columbia University, and he's double majoring in neuroscience and biology and gearing towards medical school. He serves as a leader of the You Can Too program, which is a nonprofit organization that matches Black, Brown, and Latino college students as mentors to high school students of color. Welcome, Ms. Ikena, to the show.
Thank you for having me, Miss Wilda.
Yes. Thank you for joining us today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our moderator, Miss Bianca. Miss Bianca, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Hello,
Doing very well,
gentlemen.
thank
How
you.
are you doing? Nice to
Doing
see
well,
all
you.
of you.
Good to be here.
Good. Great. And thank you, Miss Wilda Black, for once again giving me this honor to speak with these young, fine men. Now, today, of course, we'll just jump right in. Some of these men here I saw grow up. That tells you about how old I am or how young I am. And I'm very proud of each one of them and their accomplishments. And I'm proud to meet two other gentlemen today here who I'm very interested to see how they map their path and their successes. And so I'm going to dive right in. What How did race, when you were choosing your schools, was the racial makeup of your schools important to each of you? Because like Columbia University has 5.2% about African Americans, Texas A&M about 3%, but Shahid, you were lucky. 33.4, University of Memphis. So the racial disparity there wasn't as wide. So and you all can just jump in whenever you're ready. How did the racial framework of each of your schools play when you were choosing your colleges?
I guess I could go first.
Okay.
I don't think it was necessarily one of my, or rather, am my one of my main points of consideration. I don't think it's one of the things that I was really like trying to decide whether or not I would be more comfortable in a school with less white people or the other. Just because, like I mentioned, I grew up in Kenya, so for most of my life, I grew up around fellow Kenyans look like me. And in selecting a school, I knew that I wanted to be in a school that's in a city. Um, and it was really more, I think the consideration was more heavily on the potential for, I guess you could call it return on investment. So race, for me personally, wasn't really a big consideration as far as like a deterrent or an encouragement to go to a particular school.
Awesome. So for you, it was basically what you would get from the school, or what major you were looking for. Okay. Next. Anyone else can jump right there. Mr. Tate, you look very anxious to answer this. How did that play?
Honestly, I was going to echo his sentiments. I think I was more so primarily focused on, what I wanted to study and just being involved on campus and things of that nature. In retrospect, I do think that going to an HBCU would have been a significantly different experience and potentially even a much better experience. But early on, going into college, when I was looking for schools, I think I was really more so looking at who was offering the most money and just kind of what better served me for what I was trying to accomplish at that time.
Awesome. Michael.
Oh yeah. Like the two guys before me, Shahid and Collins, I didn't actually factor that in at all. I just chose whatever direction was going to be best compatible and also bring a return on investment, basically.
Great. So I'm hearing from all the three up there is that the ROI, return of investment, is what you and I guess you're nodding in acknowledgement, Mr. Ikenna.
Yeah,
Yes.
I definitely agree with what everyone else said. For me, I didn't start contemplating race until I actually stepped foot on my campus. And when applying and deciding a school, the sole determinant as to where I ended up was the amount of financial aid I received from the school. And Columbia was gracious enough to give me more or less a full ride. So it was really hard to turn down that offer when deciding a school. But race didn't really play a factor for me until I started navigating Columbia as a campus.
Okay, and I like that you brought in you had a full ride scholarship, and each of you can let me know what the perks were that you got when you went to your schools, because a lot of people say the education system, while intended to uphold equal opportunity, often entrenches disparities just by the way it's designed. Do you believe that your school did do that? Did they perpetuate systematic racism, or were you given equal opportunity, and you didn't have to worry about it regardless of your surname, the way you looked, or how you sounded? And tell us about it.
I definitely think that systematic racism isn't as prevalent at a school like mine, but it's more so systemic racism, racism that's entrenched in the system and in the makeup of the school as a whole, because Columbia it sits right in the heart of Harlem, more or less, and it's surrounded by Black communities, it's surrounded by Hispanic communities. However, those communities that surround Columbia they barely make it into the campus. There's no accessibility between Columbia and the communities that surround it. You would think a school that is right in the middle of Harlem would have more Black students. You would think a school that's right in the middle of Harlem would have more Black teachers, a more diverse curriculum, a application process that's a lot more accessible, but it's not. The people who go to Columbia are people who've had access to better high schools, who've had, very comfortable upbringings. And like myself, I went to an elite high school in Manhattan. So I wouldn't have even known Columbia was a thing unless I had that experience of going to the school that I ended up going into. And I know that's the case for a lot of Black and brown and, Hispanic students coming up through high school, that you don't get those opportunities because you just don't know they exist. And that's how these schools keep students like us out.
Interesting. So your parents, or your choice, of course, if your parents or your mentors then did give you a good backbone or a good foundation that enabled you to, and we'll come back to a foundation as parents. Shahid, Collins, or Michael, any of you can jump in here.
I think I would also echo what Ikena just said. When thinking about systemic racism, it's in the fact that Columbia has not been able to challenge the system enough to where their campus is representative, even at the bare minimum, the general population, maybe even better, incorporating the students that would benefit the most from this education, shows that they are, if not complicit, actively perpetuating systemic racism. Now, what he kind of said with not having enough Black teachers, enough Black students, and even the application process itself being very inaccessible, are the things. Those are the systems that like you said, keep us out. When you talk about things like application fees, all the recommendation letters you have to get, all this terminology of like GPAs and APs, and there's so many obstacles that if you don't have a hand guiding you, or a supportive family, or an environment of which a certain level of luxury and comfort is necessary, that is oftentimes not the case for a lot of our communities, just because working class is a little bit lower than working class. You don't have that luxury to even start thinking about writing an essay and getting tens of people to look over it, and to go through that whole process. You need to have a certain access to, like you said, access to those kinds of resources. And there's a lot more people who are in affluent, from affluent families that are able to demonstrate that. It doesn't mean that like it ends up kind of, and this, we could talk about something like the SAT and the cultural implications of how people perform on that exam. It was made without our communities in mind, and so it can be very difficult to kind of penetrate into that system. Now, with that being said, us being there and being present in that environment, I think for me is what, like you said, when you start navigating the campus is what really made a difference, because once you get to learn of that and learn of the disparity and really see it for yourself, I make more conscious effort than I did back in high school to reach back and kind of really pull as many people up as I can, doing through mentorship, like some of my friends here have been doing, and just kind of being a resource to try and bridge that gap, to try and get accessibility to my community, to these spaces.
Awesome. And it's good for you to give back, and to do the mentorship, because I'm sure, like, if you're someone's age, if they see where you've reached or what you've achieved, I think they're more receptive to guidance. Yes, Tate.
Oh no, I didn't. I really didn't have anything to add. I think they pretty much hit the nail on the head. Not being aware of certain resources that are there to set them up for success can, make things very difficult, especially as far as getting into school, being aware of certain programs, things of that nature, the barriers that they mentioned. I really don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. Michael.
Yeah, I would echo Shahid. But I will add that I feel like a lot of these barriers are a result of, like, for instance, if I were to build a school, I would build it with my children in mind, right? I wouldn't necessarily think about the tens and thousands of other children from diverse backgrounds and diverse challenges. I would just think about my kids, because those are the people that I'm probably going to care most about. I'm not going to care as much about Shahid's kids or Colin's kids or Ikena's kids. not that I don't care, but I'm not thinking from their perspective, what are they experiencing, right? So the people
Yes.
who built up this country built it up from that perspective. They invested thinking about their children. In fact, I understand that there were charter schools that were started up by people who were of a more melanin, more dark complexion like myself. There were schools that were started up, and other people had the opportunity to put their kids in that school, but the idea of getting into that environment and trying to build it up, sacrificing your child's education or whatever, or compromising it potentially, was just difficult thing. So instead of putting your child in something that's supposed to be a joint effort to build up quote unquote your community, is a difficult thing. So some people decided not to continue on in that venture. And like my parents specifically, they didn't go to particular communities for me to go into school. They went to people who are lighter than me, right? They went into I think one person said they went to an elite high school. I went to an elite high school, and that was a strategic move on my parents, and they had to move into an elite neighborhood that they couldn't afford to live in. So my parents sacrificed comfort, to put me in a school that had AP classes, where I could get college credits and things of that nature. But even there was a lot of barriers. And I know that there was, because I could see how, the kids had relationships with the teachers that I didn't have, because they belonged to a particular community where they frequented and saw one another. So there was this there's just this huge network of, I'm showing you the ropes, and I didn't get shown those ropes. I had to have my eyes wide open, to discover avenues for my specific situation, being an immigrant, who didn't have a green card or anything of that nature. And you guys know that, when you don't have documentation, it makes it, when you have documentation, but it's not the right documentation, it makes it even that much.
You don't get, it's more difficult because you can't
qualify for
access
grants.
and you can't access a lot of things. So yes.
Exactly. So even there, I had to be a lot more sharp and on my toes, asking a lot of questions to a lot of different people to create, that space for myself here now.
If I can just really quickly kind of add on to that. Michael said a lot of really important things, but just certain things that I'd like to just push back on slightly, which is that specifically the idea that, when these schools were built and these communities were built, they were built exclusively with one community in mind, specifically white communities. And, communities like ours weren't taken into consideration. I like to push back on that because, historically there are systems in place that were built for our exclusion. If you think of systems like redlining, you think of systems like convict leasing, if you think of the intentional lack of resources that are allocated to Black communities, it's very obvious that though they build these institutions to the benefit of white communities and wealthy communities, but they also build it to intentionally exclude communities like ours. Think about how suburbs were created. Think about how, like I said, redlining happened. Things that were done intentionally to remove money and remove resources from Black and brown communities, such that now when we think of eliteness, when we think of success, we think of it vis-a-vis its proximity to whiteness, because historically white communities had created society such that being closer to white institutions, being closer to institutions like mine, comes with this assumption of intellect, this assumption of excellence, and that's a very strategic and intentional move. It's not something done naively just to benefit their children, and we fall where they may. But as they're benefiting their children, they are also intentionally creating systems to exclude our communities so that they can increase the gap between our two communities.
Now, the thing is, of course, and I'm not sure whether that will change or whether it will continue. And of course, not everybody can go to an HBCU because, I mean, maybe you don't have access to it. So, frankly speaking, people have to be able to be accommodated in these other colleges. Now, the thing is, you all were lucky that your parents gave you a foundation. And I was going to ask this. Your fathers or any strong male mentors, how did they assist in the way you carried yourselves, the way you portrayed yourselves as Black males? Because as much as you went to the elite schools, people always have this preconceived notion of what Black men are. How did having mentors and your fathers or strong male mentors in your lives help you navigate that? Either even by the way you talk, but just by the way you dress, just by the way, and of course, being immigrants, your parents probably did keep emphasizing the fact that school, 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 and you must carry yourself this way so that you just get done with school and be respectful and all that. Of course, were you came here when you were quite young, except I think Mr. Tate, who was born here. I'm not sure about Ikenna. Ikenna, did you migrate here when you were young, or were you born here?
I was born in Nigeria, and I came here when I was young.
You were young. Okay, so all of you were relatively young, so it was easier for you to adapt. But let us know about your mentors, male mentors, more specifically.
Yeah, I think for me, my dad was a big one in my life. When I was back home and he was here, him kind of being that, taking that first step to come to this country for the selfless purpose of bringing us up, like as a family, uplifting us and putting us in a better situation, was kind of like the first. He was kind of like my, I would say, even idol, to say, just for lack of better words, in the way that he was working and the diligence with which he was able to sacrifice his comfort for a long term, it was almost a decade or something before we came here. And so that kind of grit and dedication to just hard work, it instilled in me a mentality where pretty much nothing was too crazy to be a dream of mine. Like I could just, if I wanted to do it and I really wanted it really that bad, I could just find out whatever it takes. Like he always says, if you don't tell me what I can't do, if I want to do something, you tell me what I need to do to get it, and then I'll decide for myself if I can and I can't do it. So that was the same situation when I got to high school. I didn't go to an elite high school. I went to a charter school, which was majority Latino students in Dallas. But when I was I believe a sophomore, I also came across another good mentor of mine, and he showed me. He actually brought a bunch of us guys into his office, and he spoke to us about how to carry yourself, how to behave around women, especially white women, how to navigate spaces where we were, because at that point we were looking to go to college, finances, all that kind of stuff. And that was also like a good kind of base for me to go into college with, because I understood that, this is something that we've heard a lot of times, like, we got to be twice as good to get half as much. That kind of dedication that I would have to put in my work was just already evident, especially once I moved to this country. I was doing very well academically from the beginning. But understanding that I had to go that extra mile always pushed me to do better. So when it came time to apply to university, I knew about the elite colleges. I had applied to the University of Texas system. I wasn't really that confident in my chances of getting into an elite university like I did, but figuring out what it took, I studied for the SAT by myself, with the resources that I had available, and kind of just that being in the trenches, like being able to stay in the trenches and do the work quietly, was something that I picked from my dad. That I've been pretty much, I think, one of the most significant pushes in my success, I think I would say, as far as foundation is concerned.
Interesting, guys. Yeah. Hey, Kenneth, you.
Just to, I guess, echo Collins, my father is someone that I looked up to since I was a little boy. And one thing my father always told me throughout my life, whenever, you know, I would express any sort of frustration or there was a goal that I was trying to chase, he would always ask me, you know, look at everyone else who has succeeded in this field or who has succeeded in that place you're trying to get to. You know, do they have two heads? Are they superhuman? Do they have a talent or a physical attribute that you don't have? You know, they have one
Yeah.
head, two eyes, and one mouth, and two, like, a nose. So you have everything that they have. You know, are you willing to do the work to get to where they are now? And that was something that my father not only said to me, but also exhibited through his actions. When we came to this country, my dad had a bunch of different jobs, from taxi man to security guard to, you know, he did a whole bunch of things. And he was working diligently as he was doing all that to get himself through medical school, to get himself, you know, through school to the point where we are now. And just watching him as a young child, I never really understood why he was so stressed all the time, because I was very young. But, you know,
Yeah.
as I matured and as I saw the work he was putting in, and as I got to the place where I am now, doing work at Columbia and, you know, trying to get myself through medical school, to medical school as well, I now understand all the challenges that he faced and all the, you know, the mental, you know, the mental cost that comes with navigating the world the way he had to navigate it. um I guess the spiritual battles that he had to fight sometimes, you know, convincing himself that, you know, he could do it and he had to stay on the right road. So this, watching my dad move and watching him, you know, for lack of better terms, grow, and watching him persevere, he's primarily the reason why I feel like there's nothing that I can't do if I put my mind to it and I have a good support system around me.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think for me,
Yeah.
I think my upbringing was also very fortunate as well, but also unique in that my father, his father was not in his life, so a lot of the things that my dad passed down to me, there were things that he had to learn on his own, and for me, that was a message in itself. That was very encouraging and inspiring within itself. The fact that he did not have too many people in his life to invest in him and teach them those things, at least from a male perspective. But nonetheless, growing up, I was taught to work hard. Growing up, I was taught to be a leader. Growing up, I was taught to be a protector. Growing up, I was taught, you know, when you get older, to be a provider. Growing up, and I was taught that no opportunity is outside of my reach and that I can have anything as long as I'm willing to work for it and put forth that effort. You know, obviously, college was something that was highly, highly encouraged, and it wasn't some back passive thought or anything like that. So I'll say I was very fortunate in that way from my father, and even other examples that may not have necessarily held my hand and like walked me through things, but just observing them. Like I have an uncle who came here from Kenya and he worked 2 full-time jobs while being in school. So very similar to, I think it was your dad's story you said to Ken or Collins, about just seeing your dad working, or yeah, seeing your dad working so hard. My uncle, man, he was like moving off of no sleep and still working and doing all these other things. And even my grandfather, when he was in Kenya, he could not afford school at a young age. His parents only had enough money to put only one of the children in school, so he used to follow his sister to school every day and sit outside of the classroom. And he would just listen, and eventually he convinced the teachers to let him do work outside. And eventually he was actually able to start school in, I think it's called Form 3.
Yeah,
And
that's
he
like
did his first,
junior. Yeah, it's, I think it's
yes,
equivalent to being a junior.
right, right. And
Yeah,
but he did
in
his
high school.
first 2 years of school outside of the classroom. So for me, as far as just the men in my family in general, I feel as though I come from a family of just persistence and overcoming things and endurance and just so many very good things that have taught good things for me to learn over the years. So yeah.
And it's good to see you. You all are lucky. Not a lot of Black men have any strong mentors or fathers, because more and more so we see a lot of Black men being raised by single mothers or single parent homes. So they don't have that kind of stability or that kind of backbone, you know, or their surroundings either are not conducive for them to just have that healthy male bonding relationship. Yes, Michael. You grew up in a house full of boys.
Yes, I did. Yeah. You know, my dad, like similar to your fathers. My dad was a hard worker. I think the most important thing that he handed down to us was his religion. Um, just patching us into our identity in God, our Heavenly Father, was a big deal for me because it instilled within me a deep sense of purpose, value, you know, and it just helped ground me and kind of help me chart my course in life. So no matter what it is that I was doing, I was always, living life very intentionally and in my purpose. And then at some point, my dad said to me, like close after graduating high school, that he always stressed the fact that I needed mentors. He felt like he, being a parent, was too emotionally involved to give me sober advice that he felt like I needed, in a way. So him and my mom actually prayed that and thought of different people, in our community, recognizing, that principle that it takes a village to bring up a child. They prayed, and they didn't necessarily say, talk to this person or that person. But I found out later that my mother called Uncle Ralph, Pastor Black, and said, "Hey, this is your nephew's, your friend's nephew, Tunzi. Take him under your wing or whatever." So a few years ago, him and I actually started working together again from a spiritual standpoint and helping plant a church here in Texas. And that in my estimation, for me, that was the biggest thing that helped catapult me to the next level. Having that accountability, which is something that I sought after, something that I wanted. I didn't like. I'll tell you. I told Elder for initially, I didn't like my dad, and I didn't like Elder Black. For a variety of reasons.
That's interesting. Yes,
we butted heads, but it was it's been a very what's called nourishing experience. And to tell you the truth, like today. If anybody touched either one of them, they would suffer greatly in one way or another, because I love them dearly. And I appreciate them for the things that they've instilled in me and shown me. They're not perfect people. However, they are definitely people with their heads on in the right direction. And I appreciate that, which helps me, keep myself honed in the right direction as I pursue various things in life.
and that's an interesting take on how your father decided to parent. He wanted also another perspective from another strong male figure. And
Right.
any men who are watching out here, if you can't handle, or because these kids in this generation, y'all are not like us. When we grew up, it was more or less we just listened to what the parents said and we went along with it. But you are able to voice your opinions, thankfully. So it may not be button heads, but you're strong, and because of the experiences you have to go through, maybe your parents are not equipped, or maybe they feel that there's somebody else who has a different perspective. So male parents, don't hesitate to reach out. Last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about raising children as a village. Now, in this issue of race, and I liked when you talked about religion, and before we end the show, I would like to touch on religion and have words of wisdom to take us out of when we're closing out. So I'll put a pause on that one. But I want to talk about the issue of race in your community and schools. What experience did you all have personally? Like, did you face anyone calling you the N-word, or just because, number one, again, you had a double whammy. Shahid, now, first of all, Shahid, your father is African American and your mother is African. I'm not sure if both your parents African.
Yes.
Okay, so both your parents are Nigerians. And as you know, Nigerians have a strong culture and they don't like when you were talking about your dad, I was just visualizing him telling you about don't you have a mouth, a hand for those of you who know Nigerians. And then Collins and Michael, both your parents are of African descent. Now, was it different because Black people, let's now be very frank, Black people think that African people or African kids come here and they have more advantages, or they don't, you never really fit in because you're not really African American, so they also push you to the side. So you're dealing with external forces. How did you guys navigate that? Were first explaining about your African descent, and then being called the N-word, or just facing racism in your community, church, or school, or wherever, even on the streets?
I guess.
I think for me
Go ahead, Ikenna,
personally,
or Tate. Go
that
ahead.
was kind of like a threefold question a little bit.
Yeah, you can attack
I
it
think for
from
me,
any angle.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think for me, my dad from America is African American, like you said. My mom is from Africa. So I was born here. I've lived here my entire life, and I would say I definitely experienced, just from like an African to African American standpoint. I feel like I definitely experienced. I prefer. I would call it more so just ignorance from both ends.
Mhm.
Obviously when I was a kid, everyone liked to use the I'm sure you may have all experienced this, the people calling you African booty scratcher and all this sort of stuff.
Oh yes.
I'm sure that's
Hmm.
something that hits home a little bit for everybody, but
No, it's true.
so I experienced I experienced a deal of ignorance from Black people, but I also experienced a deal of ignorance from African people as well. Kind of putting all these American stereotypes on me. Even when I went to Africa, I remember walking down some steps and these kids kept saying like, "What's up, my N word" to me, and just kind of making fun or whatever.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like, we were kids, so it's not anything that I like hold dearly to my heart in anger or anything like that. But that was something that I did have to deal with. And growing up, I did kind of deal with a little bit of identity crisis. But at the same time, I was grateful for that because it charged me to educate myself. And then in turn, I was able to educate Black people. I was able to educate African people. I was able to identify the disconnect between those two cultures and kind of operate as a bridge in the instances in which it was necessary. But
Mhm.
from just being an African or African American man dealing with white people, I definitely experienced bigotry in that aspect as well. Of course, I've been called the N word. But just I remember in high school experiencing a lot of just ignorant moments from white people, like when Obama was first running, and one of my teachers was like, "I'm blacker than Obama," and like, what does
Wow.
that imply? Like,
Yeah.
because you speak a certain way, because he speaks a certain way, he's not culturally Black. So what does that say about Black people? White people speak a certain way, proper or whatever. Black people can only speak in an ignorant way and move in an uneducated way. Like, so many negative implications within that statement. And then even to take it further, I had one teacher, he stood me in front of the class next to another white person, and the white person that he stood me next to wasn't dressed up in like a suit or anything. The white person had on a hoodie, and like me, I wasn't sagging or anything crazy like that. And he stood me in front of us both in front of the classroom, and he said, "Who would you rather hire for a job?"
Whoa.
And
Hmm.
then the whole class pointed to me, and then he
Hmm.
said, "You're saying that because you know what I'm trying to say," or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's a few other like very like racially charged statements that this teacher said. I'll be intrigued to know if he's still working there. But anyway, to answer
You
your
all
question,
didn't protest or complain at the time?
honestly, at that time I was so young, I did not know how to receive those experiences. I think if I could go, like, the man who I am today would, whew.
Would not. Yes.
Yeah, but back then it was so off guard, I didn't know how to respond.
Wow. Yeah, and I think age has to do with it, or you're just focused on being in school that just goes over your head. But I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
if all were you to all go back to high school, you would be in the
Yeah.
principal's office a few times. Yes, yes,
Yeah, I think
Collins.
I think experience, yeah, is also like a big part of it. Because there's been a very conceited effort, a very intentional effort to keep our communities separate and to kind of have those groups formulated among ourselves. We have discussions about black men versus black women, light skin versus dark skin, African versus African American. Those kind of, I would even go as far to say abstract groupings, which at the end of the day really don't have a meaning except tying us to a certain history and a certain background. Merge the conversation in the fact that when we approach these topics, a lot of times is kind of coming from a us versus them perspective. And I think that isn't one thing that, especially for me, even when I came to the States, I never really got to engage a lot with the African American community per se. I didn't really have a lot of, like I said, my school was majority Latino, and when I was here, I mean, at just my church, we go to church. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. We're like something like 80-90% Kenyan. So I was just very much in, I guess you call it a Kenyan diaspora community bubble almost.
Cocoon, more like. It never breaks a ship. So you're just in there, spun in there, never moving out.
People from the same area and everything. So, but in there, I was also aware of the fact that I'm in America, and that there was, from media and all that stuff, you could get in, like hip hop and all that stuff, you get sources of that community, and you can see how they portray it in media and all these discussions. And there was also a lot of talk within my community, and a lot of people that I know that would always kind of put labels on African Americans. They're lazy, or just kind of coming from a place of not really understanding the impact. And you mentioned the statement of they think that Africans come here and we're better off than them. But I think it was kind of like Tate mentioned, that level of ignorance from our communities on the challenges and the like he kind of mentioned earlier, the systems that have been put in place to exclude them. African Americans have lived in this country for centuries, and they have been fighting this fight for equality for so long that you can imagine like somebody facing that much trauma. And obviously trauma is passed down through generations, and so all that pent up trauma that has yet to be addressed, that is sitting on these communities on their backs, and they're still carrying this load. We do benefit from that. All the struggle that they've gone through, we get to come here from a place, and as much as we also had our colonization, all the impacts of that. When we come here, we have a certain level of stability, and that even the simple fact that you can claim a country outside of the United States as your home country. I'd be like, I'm Kenyan, or Nigerian, whatever the case may be. Having that mental separation from the country that has oppressed your people forever gives you a certain level of, I don't know if you call it like support or like kind of confidence or even morale to kind of keep going and kind of do that in a different way. So there's I would just echo, again, to summarize Tate's point, that there's a level of ignorance that is separating our communities. If we would just kind of reach across and learn from each other's experiences and realize that we have more in common than anything else. For me, going through the world, they don't really, when white people see you, they don't know if you're African or you're just black first.
Exactly.
When we realize that there's that commonality, and that's the common ground from which we're coming from, I think a lot of issues can be resolved from that perspective and that kind of grace that we extend to each other.
Yeah. I definitely agree with a lot of, I think everything Colin said, I definitely agree with it, especially the point he makes about the luxury that it is to be able to claim a homeland. Like for myself, it would be Nigeria. African Americans, especially those who are descendants of slaves, you're forced to not only occupy a group that is oppressed, but because you don't know where your ancestors come from, you're also forced to identify with that group that is oppressing you. So you can't say, if you're an African American who's a descendant of slaves, you can't say I'm Ethiopian American or Kenyan American, or because you don't know. So all they can say is I'm American or I'm African American, and that's I think our communities, we don't fully comprehend how traumatic that might be for these communities, being forced to identify with the same people who have been stepping on their necks for 400 years now. And for us to come over here, yes, to most communities, when you look at us, it's just black, right? You just see black. You don't really know where we're from, but there is a luxury and there is a privilege to be able to come and, I guess, kind of like start afresh. You know, you have a clean slate when you come here. Whereas, you know, for example, if I was born to an African American family, they have centuries of history that I'm old, that I have to navigate the moment I come out the womb. The moment I'm born, I now have 300, 400 years of history that is on my shoulders, whether I know it or like it or not. And frankly, I don't have, as a Nigerian, I come here and I don't have that weight on my shoulders. You know, frankly, my experiences when people find out I'm Nigerian, you know, I receive, especially in professional settings, it's like very positive remarks. You know, I'm pre-med, so I shadow and I shadow an ophthalmologist. And when I told him my name, he's like, "Oh, you're Nigerian." And this is a white man. And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Oh, I love working with your people." And you know, just from my name, you know, and this stereotype that Nigerians are very hard workers because we're one of the more successful immigrant groups in the United States. You know, so there's a lot of privilege and there's a lot of comfort that comes with being able to say, I'm Nigerian, I'm Kenyan, I'm Ethiopian, I'm Ghanaian, I'm from Zambia. You know, there's a lot of comfort in that. And you know, coming to America from a young age, I feel like I was also part of those group of young kids who experienced that, you know, ostracization that Tate was talking about, you know, the old African booty scratcher thing, and being kind of cast aside and not really included in a lot of things. And I didn't really understand that because most of the people saying that to me were other black kids. So I grew up not really understanding why that was. But when you mature and you look at the histories and you look at, you know, the way society is structured, you kind of start to understand that frustration a bit, even though it was not expressed in the most ideal sense. But you kind of learn, okay, I came here and I'm reaping all the benefits of the things you worked for, and a lot of these benefits that I'm reaping, you that worked for it are not reaping it, you know. So I understand some of that frustration. In regards to your second question about the racism I experienced, it's more the racism I experienced is systematically in my high school. You know, in my high school, there were people who would come out and just say the most bigoted things, the most just out of pocket statements, from, you know, go back to Africa, go back to your country. The N word was, you know, popular jargon within the white community at my high school. Even outside of, you know, racism towards blacks, there was an incident in my school where white kids were going around drawing swastikas all over the school, you know, like Hitler signs of hatred all over the school. So my school definitely had my high school had very intentional racism going on. Whereas in my college, I feel like, given, you know, a lot of these students, you know, mature and develop and grow, they kind of learn how to evolve their bigoted beliefs and mask it within the system they navigate. By that, I mean the curriculums that they force down upon the students, the way that the kind of microaggressions, the expectations they have of you, like small comments like, "Oh, you're black, so you must be a fast runner." Oh, when I got into college, when I got into Columbia, they were like, "Oh, of course you got into Columbia, you're black." And you know, they mask racism in this very, I don't know, very coy, very incognito type of, you know, ignorance that they're very good at, especially at the collegiate level. They say things that are, they say things that when you unravel them are just blatantly racist, but they mask it in this microaggressive, very coy, very slick type of dialogue.
I
I
believe
think
your
you're muted.
microphone is muted.
Oh, let me. Oh, okay. I forgot to unmute myself there. Yes, Michael. How did you deal with racism? Real quick, your experiences, if you had any, and your
Um,
response to them, or did you just concentrate on just getting your education and getting out of there?
I don't know. Like, I feel like I've had a very fortunate experience. I mean,
Hmm.
I do remember statements of African booty scratcher.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've had instances where people call me the N word. Um, but from like the school's standpoint? Is that the question?
Yeah, no,
Or
just from your experience, and of course now all of you. I mean, sometimes you have jobs, or right now even when you're working, being an African. I mean, have you faced any kind of racism?
my job, I wouldn't say so.
Hmm.
I will say that people are inherently like they approach you believing that you act a certain way based on first impressions. Like before I started speaking, um, you I'm a particular color, so you have certain expectations of individuals and how they're going to act and respond. So I definitely had that in high school. Um, yeah, for the most part, I had that in high school. A lot of my classmates, just given my appearance, believed that I should act in a certain way. So they would just, based on what they saw on television or what they saw in the media or whatever past experiences they'd had. And there were even some students who were similar complexion to myself who acted one way in freshman year, but because of the stereotype that people had of them, they began to kind of morph into that, right? Given, I think one of our panelists talked about they were trying to find what their identity was, right? And when a society believes that you have to be and talk and move a certain way, you ask yourself, am I what I'm supposed to be? Am I operating in the way that I should be or whatever? So you question that. So you begin to move, and sometimes you just kind of fold into the mold that people have have developed these certain expectations. You fold into that mold to meet those expectations or exceed them or whatever. Um, and I definitely saw that in high school, but it's not something that necessarily. It's something that shook me a little bit,
Yeah.
in terms of identity, but it's not something that necessarily caused me to not buckle. However, I will say that because I jumped into different pockets of people, whether it was the AP kids, which were predominantly lighter skinned, or if it was the kids from the hood, I did hang out with different groups of people. So on a dime, I could speak differently. If you guys know what code switching is,
Yes.
yeah, it's not something
When
that I
when you're in a certain place, you speak proper, and then
yeah,
when you
and it's not something that I intentionally did. It's just being exposed to different groups. Africans speak a certain way.
yeah.
Our skinned brothers and sisters speak a certain way. Our darker skinned brothers and sisters, from the American community, speak a certain way. So it's just navigating those different social settings. I was exposed to a lot, right? Coming into college and graduating and starting work, I would say that everyone has had certain expectations. But one thing that I've been really trying to understand this whole thing about racism. Um, and one thing that I realized is that one thing that I came to the conclusion of today, our lighter skinned brothers and sisters who own other people, they believe in hard work, right?
Hmm.
But they didn't have to suffer for the gains to in terms of working hard, right? So for 400 years or however many years it was, they were working, and work was pleasurable, and they love hard work. They value it. And then our darker skinned brothers and sisters, they had to work on fear of punishment and death, right?
Yes.
And they were owned. So they like Pavlov's dog. You develop uh, operant conditioning towards this thing that one group values, right? And you have a negative association with it, right? And when you're finally free, that association doesn't just go away, right? You don't just immediately start to value something that another group values, right? So one thing that I've realized is the value systems and the things that one group values and the things that another group values are at odds because of the origins of it, and I feel like a lot of things are a misunderstanding. So the reason why I came to that conclusion is the other day one lady, she's probably like 68 years old, 70 years old, came up to me and was like, "Oh my goodness, Michael, I'm so proud of you, how you've grown, and you're not my own, but by golly, I'm proud of you as if you were, you know,
Yeah.
a little old white lady." And
Mm-hmm.
it stood out to me because at least at my work, I'm now beginning to set myself apart in different ways, and I recognize what this group of people values, and I feel like a lot of it is a misunderstanding and not having the particular conversations, um, just to understand one another. Not saying that all of this is completely a misunderstanding and none of this is intentional at all to marginalize and disenfranchise people, but it has its origin somewhere. And those are the things that I kind of wanted to understand. But I feel like I've had a very fortunate experience personally, with different people groups, as much as there's negativity in it.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about some of these things are inherited and some of them are all in the mind. And there's actually a comment on Facebook where somebody says racism is still going on, but it isn't physical, but it's more of mental racism. And as guys, you're all well spoken, as Michael said. Your speech, you have to change your speech and speak differently. Some of us, all of us here on this panel right now, if you were going to speak in front of white people, frankly speaking, they'll say I used to be told that you sound like the whitest black girl we've ever, and I'm pretty sure the way you guys talk, I'm pretty sure they've said you're the whitest black person I've ever heard speak. Or even if you get on the phone and then they see you, then they look a little bit and say, oh, I can't put two and two together. That wasn't you who was on the other line. But you guys have been able to adapt because you know that you have to kick into survival mode as a black man. As a black young man, you have to be adaptive. You have to change with your situations. Now, how is it then that you can help other men, young men, and even the grown folk, push the system so that gentle push is not really, because you can only change something slowly, so that students young black students, men, can live their lives and be successful on their own terms without carrying the baggage of their parents or without carrying the baggage of racism. And do you think that racism, they're asking here if racism is just purely now a misunderstanding? Because after 400 years, at what point do we start to effect solutions rather than sitting down and feeling sorry for ourselves?
I think Collins said that pretty well earlier. He talked about how, after he's succeeded, he reaches back to, younger people that have yet to travel that path that he traveled. So they don't necessarily have to jump through the same hoops, or reinvent the wheel, and discover things that he's already kind of discovered. I think it's mentorship is a huge thing. It's going to be a huge thing, and just building up people who are from disenfranchised stands, who don't have the opportunity, or don't even know where to ask or who to ask, to gain the knowledge for certain things that we may have obtained already, and for that group of people to build on that, and pass it forward, going forward.
Yeah, just on top of that, I think it's also like living your advice, like, what I mean, like being that person that you wish you had, or whatever qualities that you may have or experiences you may have wanted to have seen or be have represented, like doing your best to kind of fill those gaps or trying to push those gaps to be filled. For me, healthcare, especially in this country, is very white, but working to not only get there to serve the community, but to also prove like you can do it, like you can be that person. I think also living in our truths also helps other people be comfortable to live in their truths. Like if you see somebody that's like very comfortable in their skin, they are speaking, their speech is articulate, like all those things that are antithetical to the stereotypes that we have been placed on our people. being intentional about proving those wrong helps kind of send that, put a crack in the ceiling, if you will. But I just want to touch on the question about, is systemic racism just now like a thing of misunderstanding or whatever? Absolutely not. I think it's still very much so intentional. A lot of the people that are in Congress are old people that were still alive during the implementations of a lot of the discriminatory policies that Martin Luther King and rest in peace John Lewis was fighting for or fighting against. Those are still the people that are very much in power. If they were not old then, they had been born. They lived through segregation. Segregation and all those things that were there. So in their foundational years, they were brought up on these principles that they are superior and that they are better, and that our communities don't deserve quality of life, don't deserve access to education, all those things. Like, and you can see it in the policies that they fight for in Congress today. For the fact that the Voting Rights Act was overturned by the Supreme Court, the fact that there's still a lot of discussion around school funding, that something crazy like in the tens of billions of dollars are sent to majority white schools in comparison to schools of color, with schools with students of color. Even things with zip codes and how you attend schools based on your zip code. There's still a lot of policies that are holding us back. Recently, even financial institutions being some of the worst perpetrators of this systemic racism. Black people are still facing a lot of, and credit to Obama for trying to fix it, but a lot of disparity, especially when it comes to like mortgage lending, and which, as in this country especially, property owning is one of the bigger markers that to building generational wealth. If you have a house, you can pass it down, et cetera, et cetera. So if Black people can't even get mortgages, when it comes to loans for businesses, in this past COVID bill that they passed, I think PPP or something, the one that was supposed to give stimulus or like loans to small businesses.
Yeah, they ended up going to
majority white. 90% of
yes, majority white
Black businesses owned by Black women did not receive any aid.
But again, people didn't. Again, on that note, they said too that Black people were hesitant. A lot of Black people didn't even do the application because they felt that they would be rejected anyway. So they had this defeatist mentality already.
But that wasn't, that's not something that you were like, you woke up one morning and you were like, okay, yeah, it's never gonna happen. That's coming from years and years and years and years of trying to do that, trying to tap into these financial institutions for loans and being denied for the sole fact that you're just Black. Like, you have everything that the person next to you has, and still you're not getting access to those relief funds. Like, something crazy, like, even in this moment, it's not even, sometimes it even crosses race. Like, the rich, this is a whole different discussion, but wealth disparity, right? Like, the wealthy people have made so much money during this pandemic while there's 44 million people unemployed. Like, it's not just a misunderstanding. I think it might have been founded on a misunderstanding or just like a false belief, but it's been entrenched so much in the systems and the policies that we live by. We live by the law, they call it the rule of the law or law of the land or whatever. A lot of those laws are still against us. We still cannot police brutality. There's just so many examples of why the system is still actively holding Black people back.
Just to build off of what Colin said, I feel like we make the mistake of convincing ourselves that we are so far removed from the systems that have been put in place to oppress Black people. More recently, just to address this physical and not mental thing, Black people are still being hung from trees. Black people are still being brutalized in their communities. Black people are still having, for example, George Floyd having their necks knelt on for 9 minutes. Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed while she was sleeping. Ahmaud Arbery was running by himself and was shot. So it's definitely physical. It's definitely things that we can point to and say that these are physical manifestations of racism and bigotry, and not something that is in our head or the manifestation of a defeatist mentality. But furthermore, we also have systems that have taken the place of slavery. Slavery came and it went, but in its place were systems like sharecropping, where we weren't given land, where we were told, okay, if you're going to work on a land, you have to give part of your part of your profits back to white slave owners. When slaves were freed, the government paid millions of dollars in reparations to slave owners and not to the slaves who were doing all this free, awful labor for years. And then when they tried to build generational wealth by owning land, they were told, no, 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 we're going to take some of that profit as well back to the white people who were enslaving you for generations. And then if you move forward, you have systems like convict leasing, where black people were funneled into prison systems so that they can do free labor. And then that labor, those profits from those labor were given back to white slave owners. And then if you move a little forward, you have things like redlining, where they would draw lines on the map and say these communities shouldn't get funding, these communities shouldn't get proper schooling, these communities should be over policed so that black people can go into jail, black people won't have the right upward mobility, black people can continue remaining oppressed. And then we move forward to Jim Crow and mass incarceration. So slavery came and went, but in its place were multiple systems that effectively established and did the same thing that slavery was meant to do, which is to oppress black people, which is to keep them out of the higher sections of society, which is to make them feel and behave inferior. And it's not just something we're thinking, it's not just a imagination, it's not just a feeling. You can point to these events, you can say there's a tangible, documented disparity in the way I'm treated and the way white people are treated and in the way wealthy people are treated. And that's something we have to get out of the mindset of believing that we are so far removed from slavery. Like Colin said, a lot of the people who were opposing Martin Luther King and opposing Malcolm X and opposing Angela Davis are still alive. Just because the people who are fighting on our behalf are dead, killed by the government, mind you, doesn't mean that those people who were opposing them have just vanished from the face of the earth. You can just do a quick Google search and you'll find hundreds of pages just spewing hatred towards black people, and people who make Facebook groups talking about killing black people and things like that. So we have to ask ourselves, how far removed are we really from slavery if people still have these mentalities and people still have this kind of psychotic desire to oppress and stamp on the necks of black people?
Oh my goodness. I just you're getting us now in I don't know where you were. Spirited movement is just now coming up. So I believe there will be a part 2, because now after you guys have equipped yourselves, you've navigated the system, but what I can feel from your voices and from inside of you feel that the system is just not, slavery is alive and well today, and racism as it was 400 years ago, nothing has changed. So part 2 definitely will probably be in the works here. Mr. Tate, you want to
I think
throw your 2 cents in there? Yes.
Drove it home. I think that racism is very physical, is very prevalent today. I also think that mental slavery is also very prevalent in today as well. I really wish I could remember what it was called, but I just know that there was a system in place to pit black people against each other, pit men against women against each other, to break up families. And now today you still see colorism, you still see classism, you still see black men and black women having so much strife between each other, and a lot of these are a result of systems that were placed in, that were developed years ago. So I think there's the physical aspect, absolutely, and we cannot downplay that. We cannot not acknowledge that. But then there's also the mental aspect as well. I also want to say that I don't think that anyone is saying that nothing has changed since slavery. But I do think that what everybody is saying is that we still have a lot of work to do. Obviously, people like Martin Luther King, obviously people like Rosa Parks, and I mean the list goes on, absolutely did things that pushed us forward as a community, as a culture, as a people. But that doesn't mean that, we had a black president, so now racism is gone. We don't have any more work to do. Like, there's still so much work to do. There's still so much inequity. There's still so much injustice that's still taking place today that we have to acknowledge, and we have to move forward and, finding a solution to. So, but you also asked the question of, like, how do we kind of make things better for the future? And I just kind of want to echo what everybody else was saying. Personally, I'm a strong advocate for just being a mentor for the youth. I mean, that can have such a significant impact on our children, on the people of the future, but also not being afraid to vote, not being afraid to take political action, whether it's you deciding to take a political position or just simply being willing to vote within your community, on a state basis, on a country basis, and putting people in power that actually care about the issues that affect our community and want to put us in, basically get rid of that disparity, get rid of the injustices. And ultimately, it's going to take effort from everybody, Black people, white people, people of power, everyday people. But nonetheless, I think slowly but surely we will continue to make progress as we have been thus far.
Amazing. So you young men, I have a challenge for the four of you here. You make up a good quartet here. You can start a mentorship program, especially for young immigrants per se, as well as young African Americans, because I believe if you all can get those two parties together, may change the mindset of both groups. And of course, when we come back to do part 2, I will also ask you later in part 2 on how religion has played a part in how you have been raised up and how you've been able to stand. You all look like very solid young Black men, and I wish I would see more of this than the other side of it. So this is amazing, and I'm amazed, and I'm very proud of Collins. I almost babysat Collins. Collins was very young when I have watched him grow into an amazing man. Michael too, and I'll have the pleasure, I hope in the future, to meet Mr. Tate and Mr. Ikenna personally and do all the great things that you do in the community. Don't stop. Just keep on going. So I will
Thank
see
you so
you,
much.
gentlemen. Yes, you've made your community and your village proud. Ikenna, your father would say, "You've made my village proud," oh. I'm sure he's very happy. Whereas every African parent, even your parents, your mothers, are very proud of you, all your churches, your entire community. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, and good luck in everything you do. And I'll hand it over to Miss Black. Thank
Much
you.
appreciated.
Yes, guys. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen. This was a really nice show. I was enjoying it backstage, looking at the questions and everything. Thank you for coming to the show. Hopefully next week we'll have a part 2. So we'll send out all the questions and everything that you need to prepare for. The takeaway for this, I'll say, is parents out there, if you're unable to mentor your children, get mentors out there who are able to mentor your children. And let's make this a good conversation for all of us. Talk about it at your homes and help these young people to come up as better citizens. And also lead with your values. It is easy to find a common ground on values statements than perspective solutions. Don't try to persuade people that their beliefs are wrong. Instead, find a value, focus that is equally clear and compelling to them. So with that being said, I'll see you next week. It's bye from us.